to Rogue Academy. This is how to write a hyper-theatrical play. I'm Lisa.
I'm Chelsea.
Thank you for joining us. We're going to start today with a little bit about ourselves and what we do and a project that we created together. And then eventually we're going to give you some building blocks in order to write a scene for a hyper-theatrical piece.
I'm Chelsea Sutton. I'm a playwright and a fiction writer and a screenwriter, and I write, some people have called them like dystopias with a sense of humor. They're kind of weird and wacky, and I can't help myself. So I've been working with Rogue for like 5 years or so, and have written a lot of things with them. And we write a lot of weird things and create a lot of weird worlds at Rogue. Lisa, do you want to talk about yourself?
Oh my gosh, I do. Thank you. I'm Lisa. I'm a writer, director, and actor. I like all kinds of things. I love hyper-theatrical plays. I actually first started working with Rogue as a puppeteer. I'm into clown and puppetry. And, we're going to talk today about the idea of an impossible play. And I love that. I love going to the theater and seeing things that I've never seen before and thinking things I've never thought before and feeling things in ways that I thought weren't possible. So I'd say if I were to define my work, it would be hanging out in that realm. Which is very compatible with hyper-theatrical work, sort of ambition beyond knowing how to do the thing that we're setting out to do.
So Lisa and I want to talk about, as an example, one of the plays that we wrote together, the Kaidan project, Walls Grow Thin, which was produced in 2017, but started...
One, two, I will destroy you. Sanchi, 3, 4, let's even the score. Go Roku, 5, 6, now who's playing tricks? Shichi, Hachi, 7, 8, we'll share the same fate. Kyoshu, 9 and 10, this is how you meet your end.
Years before we got involved, but we started working on it, I think, in 2016, 2015, around that time.
This was a co-production where we produced in partnership with East West Players. So it was Rogue Artists and East West Players. And it went through so many iterations before we got eventually to where we came to. The sort of amazing thing about this piece is that it's an adaptation of Japanese ghost stories, Kaidan or Khaitan. And so we had all these little stories that we were playing with that could be assembled in any way. And so we started there, and figuring out where this would be produced was actually a huge part of how the story was going to be told and what the writing would be, which is sort of, I think, different than how a lot of writers write. Usually we go and we do a lot of this, and then we go to a theater and we make it happen. But this, I mean, when I first started, we were doing a workshop in West Hollywood at a park that was in preparation for what would be a ghost tour in downtown Los Angeles and Little Tokyo. That became untenable for a lot of reasons. So then we ended up doing a workshop at these Japanese gardens in the valley of Los Angeles, and we wrote for that space as well. And then we eventually ended up in this, we lucked out, we found this 6-story abandoned warehouse. And once we found that place, we could think about who our main character was to bridge all these stories together, and also how the audience was going to move throughout the space.
So once we actually had the place where this was going to be, that kind of gave us the structure for the narrative. Like, we had the physical structure, but we also had, our play has to fit within this. So we thought about first how many audience members we could actually fit in the space at any given time, and how many were actually we could actually have a story and a connection with the audience. So we ended up with the magic number of like 12. And some of that was just walking through in groups and where we were going to have the play, and see where the space opened up or really felt not comfortable or not conducive to a story, depending on the bodies in the room. And then we explored how our interactivity between the audience, like how much we wanted people to actually do physical things and be part of the storytelling and be a part of like actually changing the dynamics of where the story was going or how the main character was exploring the world or fighting off monsters or whatever. And we also thought about, as we were adapting these stories, how design became part of our language. Like Lisa and I love to write long monologues, right? We love a little language. But there are moments, especially with a horror play, and especially with, you have audience members on their feet and a guide character who's on her feet and running around. There's not necessarily always a moment for a long monologue. There are these moments that can be expressed in silence or in a design element, in a mask floating through the darkness, rather than a long poetic monologue about the thing. And sometimes you have to think about when these magic moments can speak to the emotion, to the narrative, even more than words can. Like, what are the things that just can't be expressed in words? And I think we both had to be okay with just writing magic into the script and not worrying so much about how it was going to happen. Like, we had a fox spirit that just kept following the audience and the main character around, and sometimes we just wrote, the fox spirit shows up at the end of the hall and grows bigger.
So once we're in the warehouse, we had all these stories, and we could, stories meaning tales, and then we also had stories of the warehouse. And it was like how to move the audience through the space. And eventually we came upon this thing that, we were grappling with as playwrights, which is how women are treated in many myths, as objects, as things that are transformed, as the victims. And we thought about how that would plague a consciousness. So we came up with Kana, who was the owner of the storage building. It had been in her family for many years. She's a Japanese-American woman. And she then got stuck in the warehouse that was also a part of her psyche. So she was stuck in the warehouse physically and stuck in her mind, reliving these Japanese ghost stories. So she couldn't, it wasn't like she was experiencing these stories. They were parts of her consciousness that were coming to life. And we cast the audience then as people who needed to come and help her enact a ritual in order to heal and to regain access to the life that we all live.
I would say it turned into this story of like healing from trauma in a way. That we started with these, we picked these 4 like flagship stories that really spoke to us as an ensemble, but no single one of them was going to overtake this entire experience. So as you go through the whole thing, you are traveling through time through all these Japanese stories that all sort of have to do with victims, and especially female victims of violence, in different ways. And then our main character, who we'd already played with different versions of her through all of these different workshops and things, she became this kind of conduit of, I think, what probably Lisa and I were already dealing with as far as like being women and absorbing these stories and trying to figure out, well, what is the connective tissue, both through the stories and through like our modern world, and why are we telling these stories now? Why is this story important now? And so Kana was our like modern conduit that we could like put both of ourselves in and try to go through this world and have an audience to help us, escape from it, however we could.
Well said, Chelsea. It's funny you ask. Well, we have some thoughts, and I'm sure there's so many more about what this is. What is hyper theater? All of this. And I think that's wonderful. There's no one definition because it keeps evolving. Um, a main thing that I think Rogue thinks about when we go about making the theater is the universe that we are in, not just the room, not just the space we're in, not just what happens in the scene, but what happens in the cosmos of this reality. Because often the reality works by different rules than are the rules that we all live in. I also think having a very specific relationship to the audience is key. They're not just folks who come and watch. They are in the play, and how to build on that relationship and ask certain things of them in order for them to engage with the story on a different level than in proscenium theater. And then also, it relies a lot on design. We want to do things that feel like magic on stage. And so it infuses the way we write, definitely, because as the design changes, the writing changes, and they speak to one another instead of one really leading the way. But really, like, engaging with designers as prime creators of the piece in ways that I think in other forms of theater they don't get to play in that way as much.
I like to say an impossible play is one that most theaters will look at and go, I don't know how this would be produced. I don't know how are they supposed to float off the ground, or how is there supposed to be fish on stage or whatever. I think sometimes we get so like stuck in our literal minds that we forget how much theater can do, because theater can do anything. And when you walk into a theater, people are ready to be in an imaginative space, and they're ready to play. So when you have fish on stage, that can look like a million things. You could actually have real fish, sure. You could also have little fish on cardboard sticks, and we're cool, we're on for the ride. But like, not being afraid of that stuff is great. And I think hyper theater, impossible plays really challenge what theater is supposed to be. I think we get locked into like having your 2-person play in a living room, and it costs $5, and that's all we want to worry about, which is fine and great. But like, when the audience is primed to imagine things, why not use that to our advantage, and why not push the boundaries of what we think that can be? And I think that includes, having a wider range of stories from a wider range of people, and bringing in other art forms and bridging the gaps between all of them. I think theater is one of those art forms that it needs visual artists, and it needs writers, and it needs dancers and actors and singers and music and all of the stuff. And you can have all of it in one show, and they all work together to tell the story. It's not just based on one thing. That real theater, real impossible kind of plays, use all of those things and bring them together.
Okay, so now we're gonna get into some writing assignments. We're gonna give you some free writes. So we'll be like, do this, press pause, and you do that, and then spend 5-ish minutes on each. And then the end, we'll give you an assignment that will hopefully end up being a scene for you. The first thing we're gonna ask you to write is a free write about a theatrical experience that you've had that like blew you up, write about the time that shifted what you thought was possible for humans on stage and in real life. Or if you feel like you haven't had that, then write about what you want to see.
Yeah. And if you saw something and you thought, damn, I wish I wrote that, write about that.
Yeah, the jealousy.
So pause this video and set 5 minutes on your timer, do a free write. And free write, remember, means that you do not stop writing and you have zero judgment on what you're writing. Get a piece of paper, get a pen, just write for 5 minutes and do not stop. And if you don't know what to write, just say, this is dumb, this is dumb, this is dumb, or whatever, until you get to finally the thing you're trying to get to. Okay? All right, we'll be back. Pause it. We'll be here when you're ready.
Hi, welcome back. I hope that was super fun. So the next exercise we're going to do has to do with character. So for the following exercises, we want to give you 3 myths that you could possibly use from which to build stories. Adaptations are, always hits. And also we want to encourage you, if you're picking through an idea or if you have something you're working on, feel free to use that right now too. But we want to introduce you to 3 stories that we've used in the past to make work. So the first one is from Kaidan, actually, that we used. It's called Oiwa, and it's a Japanese revenge story. And this woman comes back with a melty face, and she murders people.
Right.
Okay, and the second myth, is the Bandit Vasquez, which actually Chelsea wrote about in Senor Plummer's Final Fiesta. Which was one of Rogue's more recent offerings. And he was like a benevolent outlaw. You know the type. Okay. Echo Narcissus is the third myth. We're all sort of familiar with it, but we're going to link you to it if you want to get familiar. So when you're writing about these, you can spend some time finding out what speaks to you to write about, and then once you found a character that you resonate with these stories or from your own imaginal space, write about their desires. So we're asking you to figure out 3 things that they want, one of which we hope will be a big macrocosmic thing, like what do they want to do with their lives, and then one being smaller, like do they want some Cheetos right now, that kind of stuff. And also, while you're at it, it might be good to give them a flaw or 2 that might get in the way of their desires. If you're stuck, you can just make lists, like they're wearing this, they like this, or you can write from their point of view. So you can write sort of a diaristic entry about how they experience the world. Take 5 minutes.
Do it the same way. Do free write it down, don't stop writing. No judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I hope the character thing went well. Because we're going to now expand a little bit. We're going to do some writing about the world. We're going to build this world out that the character lives in. So I want you to take 5 minutes and do a free write about the world around the character. So think about, what's in their immediate room, just general facts and small details, like as specific as you can get is always better. In anything you're writing, specificity really is key. What's outside of their immediate room, and like what's in the true universe of this character? Like, are they in the real world that we all live in? Is there something magical or different about it? What are the rules of the world? And a couple things to think about in terms of world building are there's the world view versus the story view. So when you're thinking about a worldview, it's what you, the writer, know about how the world works. It's like the wider context that the story lives in. So like, if you're a fantasy fan, it's knowing all the history of Middle Earth. Like, that's the worldview. Not everyone who is a character in that world knows everything about it, but you as the writer pretty much have an idea of what it is. And then the story view is what the character knows. So that's like Frodo in the middle of Middle Earth in Lord of the Rings. Frodo only knows a certain portion of like what that world is. So think about what you as the writer have to know about this world, and then think about the character's point of view. Like, what do they know? What portion of the world do they live in that they know about? And maybe what do they not know so much about? And think about logic and how, like, what are some rules? Like, does everyone fly in this world? And what are the rules about that? That's cool. Every single story has to follow some sort of like world logic. Like even Alice in Wonderland has its own like crazy rules, even if it doesn't feel like it. And yeah, and think about it in just the way that we thought about the warehouse in Kaidan. How does this setting affect the character? Does the character not like the room that they're in or the world that they're in? How is it shaping their mood or their point of view on things, their political aspirations, their sociological place in the world, anything like that? How does that affect them? Their heart. How does it affect their heart? That's a lot. It's a lot, but you don't have to write about every single one of those things, but I think all of those are sort of part of this world building, the beginning of what you're doing.
Just something that I constantly think about with adaptation, if you're choosing to adapt one of these myths, is what to keep and what to leave from the original myth. And the real answer, I think, is play how you feel it. But something I use to figure out that division is what do I think is central to the energy of the story? Not just the story, but like in my mind, when I think about what moves me from the Oiwa myth, what images and what relationships are there that I find really impactful, and like without it, the story wouldn't be the same. Those are what I preserve. And what about you, Chelsea? Are there any things for adaptation that you cling to?
Yeah, I think those adaptations should speak to the heart of what that story is about, and also the lens through which you're rewriting it through. So when I took that myth in Kaidan, I was the one who adapted that one, and that was like so far removed from like ancient Japanese culture. I put it in like a Hollywood set with like an awful director who was like murdering his actress on set in front of everybody, and she came back and took revenge. You know, culturally very far away from the original myth, but I think the heart of it for me had been this exploitation of women and woman as an object, and as soon as the man who possessed her was done with her, was thrown away, and how she kind of took revenge. And that was the thing that touched me in some way, and I felt like I wanted to explore. So I think in adaptation, it's always a fine line of how closely you want to adapt, or are you reimagining something? But I don't think there's any rules. There's no like good or bad rule. Yeah. So, okay, take 5 minutes, go write.
Okay, hi, welcome back. We've been thinking about you. We hope that 5 minutes was super swell. The next thing we want to talk about is the audience, the humans that will come see the show, will love the show. And, you know, I think it's true in hyper-theater, but specifically in immersive theater, the audience has to be cast in a way, because they are asked for more than just their eyes. Their presence is activated in a specific way. So something we have to think about is just the nuts and bolts of it, like how they get in a room. If they have seats, where do they sit? If they don't, how are they supposed to inhabit the space? And how do they learn about how they're supposed to inhabit the space? So that's sort of just like, you know, general housekeeping with the humans that are going to be involved. And then there are also more theoretical or philosophical questions, like how are they supposed to feel in this space? Are they at home there? Do they physically touch it? Are they invited to? How about the actors? Do the actors come speak to them? And what happens if the audience speaks back? How are the actors supposed to improvise or not? And also, does the story need the audience to do something in order for it to move forward? Or is their presence and their witnessing of the scene enough to move to the next moment? Anything else, Chelsea?
I think that's a lot to think about. And I think it's
Yeah.
something that a lot of playwrights, when they're writing proscenium plays, don't necessarily think about.
So you can write a free write about like, I want the audience to do this and that. You can write stage directions if you want. You can write, you know, a whole scene with them. Something that's fun in immersive theater is to use the second person. So you are going to enter the room this way and you're going to sit down over there after this thing happens. It helps you just imagine a very personal relationship with the audience. Yeah, but, you know, have fun.
All right, guys. I hope that went well. I hope you had a little bit of fun. Not too much fun. We're building up.
No fun.
So this next one, 5 minutes again. Now that we have our character, we have the world, we've explored a little bit about who the audience is and what their relationship to the character is. So we have these three things. I want you to explore one more element before we get into the scene, and that's a supporting character. I want you to treat them just like you did your main character. I want you to write about you know, their hopes and desires, make one of them really small and one of them really big. Think about how they are in relation to the main character. Like, think about status a little bit. How do they think about the main character? How does the main character think about them? Is there any, like, is one sort of a little bit more powerful than the other? Are they the same? Where are they? Yeah, so just take 5 minutes and think about them. And I don't think you have to take them from the myth that you're adapting. Like, if you're writing about Echo, this doesn't have to be Narcissus. It can be someone you totally make up. I think you can open that up for yourself.
You don't have to support, meaning like it doesn't have to be like a fun sidekick that's like holding them up. Just, it can be a nemesis. It can be something. Supporting is a tricky word.
It is. Yeah, supporting character definitely does not mean positive. It just means not the protagonist, who we've already kind of explored. Take 5 minutes, go write, come back here when you're done.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Okay, so now for the big shenanigans, the big kahuna, if you will, the scene. So this is up to you. I mean, this is our last exercise before we say au revoir. So we suggest 10 to 30 minutes, but it could also be something you start and then return to. We want you to incorporate all the free writes you've created and put them together to make a scene. Super duper extra points if you put something impossible in that scene. A general idea is that we are introduced as the audience to the main character. It could be cool if they interact with the audience in some way. Doesn't have to be. And then when does the other character enter? How do they enter? And how do they interact with both the audience and the main character?
If you're writing a scene for the first time, it can feel like, well, how long does the scene have to be? What does it even have to be in a scene? But a general structure for it that you could try to follow, that if it's helpful, is start with an immediate desire of the character. And it doesn't have to be like, I want to take over the world. It can literally be like, I really need a glass of water. Audience, can you help me get a glass of water? That's cool. Start somewhere. And because when you have a desire, when you have something the character wants, that pushes them to take an action. They go to the sink to fill a glass. And that action always leads to something that gets in their way and makes it harder. All the glasses are broken or dirty or whatever. And then that obstacle produces a reaction which makes them change their desire. Maybe I'll just grab a soda from the fridge. I just made up a whole story. It's super boring, but it's a story. And somewhere in there, the supporting character could be an obstacle that comes in and ruins. Maybe they come in and break all the glasses before they could get a glass of water. I don't know. But then the desires and the obstacles makes the character switch directions, and then their desires change and their reactions change. You can think about your whole day as desires and obstacles and reactions. So that's an easy way to just like or you write one thing, think about which one that is, and then make it harder. Make them react to that. They're just trying to walk across the room. All right, what gets in the way? There's an ottoman that they fall over. Whatever it is.
Ottoman.
But don't make anything easy for your character. They want something, make it hard. Sound good? All right, so like 10 to 30 minutes-ish. And just write. Come back here when you're done or when you feel like you just have to put it aside for a minute.
Goodbye, geniuses, for now. Hi! Welcome back and congratulations. I'm so proud. Wow. We just want to say thank you so much for joining us. It is a strange and wild world, that of making theater, and we're glad to have more compatriots in this endeavor. I'm going to pass it off to Chelsea for some last thoughts and ideas on which to foment when you're writing your brilliant play.
This hopefully was just a way to get started. The play is a long journey and you'll discover a lot of things along the way. And I think the only way to discover a lot of those things is by keeping writing. I mean, I don't know about you, Lisa, but I discover a lot of things by just writing some pages and my characters go, oh, no, this is actually what it's like.
Failing. Yeah.
And I think there's like 3 things to maybe think about when thinking about your world and your play is text, subtext, and context. So text is what the character actually says. And I don't know about you, Lisa, but most of the people I know, and probably me also, never actually say what they want or need, really. So you have one thing that they say, but then you have the subtext, and that's what they actually mean and what they actually want, which is always a little mixture with the text. And then you have the context, which is the setting, the relationships, power dynamics, and rules of the world that have an impact on those things. So a story is really just those 3 things interacting in different ways. And as specific as you can get as possible with all those things, the better the story will be. And I think a general rule, like if you're ever stuck and you don't know like where to go, just go back to your character and ask yourself, like, what do I not know about this person? Can I just get them in the room and do something surprising? And that might show you where to go. So, we hope you guys had fun. We hope you still keep writing your play. There's a ton of different exercises and things you can find online to help, boost. But I have one book that I recommend, especially if you're writing like anything that's like sci-fi or weird or fantasy or things like that. It's called Wonder Book, edited by Jeff Vandermeer. He did a ton of interviews with lots of great writers, and there's stuff that it's just like a beautiful book too. I shouldn't say
Wow.
It's just a beautiful book too, but there's great interviews with writers and exercises, and it starts from just the bare bones of writing all the way into world building and how to revise your stuff. And it's great for any genre that you're working in. What about you, Lisa?
Great. Well, me, whenever I am experiencing writer's block, I consult the Oracle Ponyo. I recommend you get one. All you have to do is feed her. Well, that was great. We have some parting words for you. Thank you so much for joining us here at Rogue Academy. I'm Lisa, and this is
Chelsea
Sutton. And until next time,
keep scheming and dreaming.
oh.